My name's Kermit Cole. I was the founding editor of Mad in America, and now hosting this podcast. And I think it's worth saying that I became interested in open dialogue 20 years ago when I was working at a group home, and I came to understand that whatever we did in the group home, whatever we achieved, would be much better if the family was involved. And that led me ultimately to being a family therapist, which I am now, with a strong interest in open dialogue. And I attended the POD training, the peer-supported open dialogue training in the UK, largely out of the fact that I love all the ideas behind it. And I did this training and came to love all the people that you see. And I believe that POD offers a lot of opportunities for bringing open dialogue to the world. Bringing open dialogue to the world has been challenging. To bring something from Western Lapland and Finland, where it grew up naturally in the community and was developed over many decades, into a world where some of the ideas, although they are old, are challenging. And in a world also where a lot of people have struggled in relation to the care that's been provided to the kinds of crises that humans experience. And I love open dialogue, but I also have come to love the POD version of open dialogue for some of the things that it brings that I think help in the transition from a community that knows it well and has come to understand it and accept it to a world where that's challenged. I'm going to ask everybody on the panel to introduce themselves, but first I'll just say a couple things about our format. We'll have kind of a general discussion about the history of POD, how it came to be, how it, what's happening now in terms of research, where we're hoping it'll go. I would invite each panelist to speak to how they came to be involved, what it has meant to you, personally, professionally, what your hopes are moving forward. And we will transition after about 45 minutes or so. We may take some questions from the chat room to the panel. But after 45 minutes or an hour, we'll go more to a question and answer kind of format. At that time, in an hour or at the hour, Russell will need to leave, and then after 90 minutes, Val will need to leave, and we will transition to just kind of a general chat room. We will invite everybody who's attending to be on screen. And we'll have a general discussion at that point. So just a couple notes. Please use the chat box to introduce yourselves and respond to each other. The dialogue that's going on in the chat room is every bit as important as anything that's being said on the screen. In our past events, we've found that a lot of networking goes on, a lot of opportunity to see each other and catch up, and the dialogue that's generated there is very valuable. If you want to use the Q&A box in Zoom, you certainly can. Just know that other people won't see it, won't see your question, only we will at that point, which is an advantage or a disadvantage, depending on how you feel about that. But we will do our best to get to those questions. And so I would like to first ask Russell, if you could let us know who you are and what you do and how you come to be here.
Yeah, sure. Hi, and thanks for the lovely welcome, Kermit, and it's lovely to see you again. So my name is Russell Razzaque. I'm a psychiatrist based in Northeast London, so kind of far top right corner of London. Also a part-time academic. I'm one of the POD trainers. I helped establish it originally with these guys, and they're also involved in helping to lead the ODDESSI trial, which is a multi-center trial with 6 pilots across the UK. Shall we go around? You want to go around to the rest of them, and then I can talk about our little story. Yeah, after.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
I'll just go clockwise from Russell on my screen. Val.
Okay, hi, I'm Val Jackson. I'm a family therapist and a pod trainer, and I'm based in Yorkshire. And I've been involved with pod since the beginning, 2014. And I'm really happy to be here. Lovely introduction, Kermit. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I think, is that enough for now?
That's enough for now. All will become clear, I'm sure,
Okay.
as it unfolds. Charmaine.
Hi, Kermit. Yeah, so I'm Charmaine. I've been involved with pod now since about 2016. One of the trainers. I guess I came to pod because I worked in peer implementation. Met Russell when I was working at one of the recovery college pilots within North East London. Yeah, so I've been involved in peer work now for about 15 years, actually.
Thank you. And that leaves Mark.
Thank you, Kermit. Thank you for the invitation, for all your work organizing this, and thanks to the 140 plus people who are listening in today. My name is Mark Hopfenbeck. I am a social anthropologist, and I was lucky enough to be approached just over 20 years ago by a wonderful group in central Norway who wanted to start an open dialogue training. And I was very inspired for them, and we had postgraduate programs in Norway for about 10 years. And then I more or less moved to England, met Val at a conference, got to know Russell, and have been part of the pod training team for the past 8 years, I think it is. I'm also a mindfulness teacher and teach a postgraduate program in mindfulness in Norway.
Thank you, Mark. I want to say before we move on, Mark, since you mentioned the work organizing this, the credit for that really goes to Karina Ruggiero, who is available in the chat room for anybody that would like to thank her personally. And I want to mention that Adrienne Murphy and Louisa Putnam are also in the chat room to help answer questions and direct people, provide direct people to resources. Anybody who's interested in learning more, doing more about open dialogue and peer-supported open dialogue. So I guess I'm going to start with Russell. How did pod happen?
How did pod happen? So I guess we have our story, I suppose, about how it happened. Depends how far you go back, but if we go back to the beginning, so Mark talked about, we started this journey around 2013, 2014. It's purely by coincidence. I've been wanting to help to move our National Health Service in the direction of open dialogue for some years, but never really found partners to do it for a long time. And then just completely by accident, I was at a meeting in the Royal College of Psychiatrists, and the psychiatrist said, well, I'm talking to him about open dialogue. And he said, well, you must have heard of Val Jackson then. She's up north, and she's invited Jaakko Sekula here like 10 years ago. So she's been involved in training open dialogue and piloting it for a long time, which I didn't know. So he gave me her address. This is the kind of guy who carries everybody's details who he's ever met in his little notebook. So he managed to get me her email address. I dropped Val a line, and we had our first conversation in January, I think 2013 or 2014. And within about 9 months, the training had started. We're fairly relentless, really, when we get started. So in that period, we happened to go to Denmark. Mark was there as well. We formed a little group and started to think through how we do the training. We asked Jaakko. I knew that we could get a few organizations on board. So I spoke to Jaakko and suggested to him that we can try and organize a training in-house and fly him over, fly other folks over from Finland and other places to help with the training. he agreed after some negotiation to support our training. And then we basically launched the training in the UK, a 1-year training, training folks from across the country. Two things that really seemed obvious that we wanted to do differently. One is that I'd heard of Parachute and some of the things that were happening in different parts of the world with peer workers. I'd been interested in peer workers before Open Dialogue. I thought this is an obvious synthesis, so we should have peer workers as part of the system, and the three of us were brainstorming and we came up with the idea of name a pod, peer supported open dialogue. The other thing is both Mark and I have a background in teaching mindfulness too, and I always thought that one of the things that will help boost people from a traditional healthcare, mental health care mindset into a more dialogical approach would be training them in mindfulness. I'd been interested for many years about training clinicians in mindfulness and how that improves their therapeutic relationships. And mindfulness was a kind of accelerator to enable people to actually become more present, less kind of directive in the way they work, and therefore more open to a collaborative atmosphere. So I'd spent years researching this. It seemed obvious to me that this is something that we should also add to the open dialogue training. We added the mindfulness in, we added the peer element in, and we had our own, therefore, sort of unique combination training, if you like, as you said, Kermit. And we haven't looked back since, right? We've trained, I think, 500-600 people from around the UK, but also around the world, as well as the teaching of open dialogue and its core principles and key elements. We also teach people mindfulness every day, not as an intervention, but as a form of personal development. We all go off into a sort of residential venue to sort of live together. We tend to train teams. We've always wanted to do that because this is only really going to work if you're a part of a whole team that's working this way. If you're one professional and or peer worker and the rest of your team don't know anything about it, it's not going to work really. You'll soon get diluted and disappear. And as soon as we started training teams, we realized what we need to do is evaluate this. So I then went on a shopping expedition for academics and accidentally managed to cross paths with Steve Pilling, who's one of the most senior academics in the UK. And I was halfway through just asking him, talking to him about it, and he decided he really wanted to help to run the trial. So then we got a very large grant, just under £3 million for the largest evaluation into open dialogue in the world, the ODDESSI trial, which is currently underway. So that's been very much knitted into the training that we've delivered as well, and continue to deliver. We've got 200 people in the next training starting September this year. So well, 220, 240. Every time we bring more people, I end up doing a lot of diplomacy, shuffling around managers. The more people we bring in, the more excited Mark gets and the more afraid Val gets. But we have our own way of trying to support each other as much as we can. But yeah, it's a great experience. We love doing it. It's something that is a wonderful part of my life and all of our lives. And it's just wonderful to see the difference it makes on the ground in the services. It's so inspiring to watch these teams transform the way they work, to hear about the stories of the families they work with. You know, there's just nothing more rewarding than doing this. So, yeah, that's I guess, a little intro on the whole training.
If I may ask, in what way has it been personally rewarding to you?
Yeah, so for me, I guess for many years, folks who know me, I notice I think Mirabai is in here, the folks who know me from far back, I'd spent many years, Mirabai will remember this, I used to convene meetings. I used to work in a ward. I was a psychiatrist for an inpatient ward for many years. I used to convene meetings of like-minded colleagues and friends about what can we do to change the system? What can we do to really enable collaborative care where everybody is equal in that environment? How can we do things very differently to what we do now? And if Mirabai and others might remember, we used to brainstorm, you know, over years, coming together, group, not knowing. I then discovered open dialogue, and I kind of felt that this is exactly how things should be organized, but I have no idea how this could actually happen. So it was a real schism to be in. But then when I got promoted to a management role, and I realized management are also banging their heads against the wall because they don't know how to manage the system. They're constantly inflating, more and more people requiring more and more support, and yet less and less resources. How do we, you know, they're open to doing something very differently. That's when we managed to start doing the experiment and doing the trials and open dialogue. And actually now it's becoming implemented policy-wise in various parts of the country. So it's been a very exciting process, and it's affected me in terms of just making me more and more inspired, giving me more and more hope as this has gone on. Going from what you think is impossible to realizing that's possible, and maybe the next thing is possible, and thinking, well, that's probably impossible, but maybe we do the next thing, and you keep going on to meet impossible targets. So yeah, it's been an amazing experience. It continues to be a roller coaster. We just keep pushing it to see how far we can go. So far, keep opening doors. That's great.
Thank you. I'd like to go to Charmaine, because you've been working with these guys. I've only known these three as the principal trainers in my pod training, but you've been deeply involved working as a peer in the system. So what has it meant to you? And I'd also would really like to invite you to help direct this conversation, since you've been in the midst, and I'm sure you would know how best to move forward. So.
Thanks. I think it's really difficult, I guess. The whole experience, and to kind of see the way that peers are embedded within sort of the open dialogue practice has been absolutely amazing. I think we've worked really, really hard as a training team to try to focus more on the P in the pod, and trying to think about how I guess we all have some degree of experience, and how imperative, particularly I would say since the pandemic, it is to be able to bring ourselves to the room, and I guess not to see ourselves in a way of being the expert, or to fear actually, being able to hold that space in a way where we're not going to be judged for who we are. And I think that's slightly different in, I've seen that develop quite differently since I first joined. I started the training in 2016 and become a trainer in 2019. So I kind of have seen an evolution in what the P in the pod has been, and continues to be, really, and that's very exciting. I think I would say there's ups and downs within that. It's not easy to do this stuff, and we're always sitting and thinking about what we need to bring to the table next, and who else can help us with being able to kind of go on this crusade of making, I guess, what I would hope to see is, I guess, open dialogue, or peer-supported open dialogue, being sustainable, really, and something that is, as well as a treatment model within the healthcare system, I guess, something that becomes a way of life in the community for people. So I think there's a distinction between open dialogue as a practice, and then kind of dialogical thinking and dialogical working, and being able to open that up in the community. I guess one of the ways I'm thinking of doing that now, very fortunate to be able to have the support of North East London within the third sector organisation I work in. We're looking at something called peer dialogue, and that's actually how a third sector organisation can work with people within the community to be able to have conversations about I guess what it is like to try to navigate mental health experiences or relational trauma outside of the context of an NHS system, a mental health care system, and work alongside the system to navigate that. So very exciting times, but very challenging times at the same time, Kermit.
When you say it's exciting and challenging times, what are the key questions that come to your mind about that?
I guess often thinking about things like how do we maintain that everybody has a voice within the work that we do. Families, sort of champions of people, we've got people in the community, be it sort of faith leaders, housing, social care, there's lots of people that I think I'm seeing, at least within the third sector, trying to work dialogically with people, that kind of helps us doing an open dialogue practice a bit more sustainable when we think about how we can work dialogically within our communities. And I guess it's just thinking about how, the threats and opportunities that come with that. We can't bring in lots and lots of people to do open dialogue training, but what can we give, what can we teach our communities to help, people to, be able to be more looked after, I guess, within the community, just by being a bit more human within our work.
I see Mark smiling, and I'm wondering if he has any input on becoming more human.
Oh, easy question, I guess. No, it attracts some people and distracts other people. But it is so fundamental to what we're doing. I guess in the same way we say we're all peers, we're all on our own personal recovery process, trying to become more human, and recognizing that universal aspect that we all share, I think creates compassion, hopefully understanding, empathy. And so we try to teach dialogically as well, and so people are allowed to adventure on their own journey, however they define what it means to become more human, and more humble, I think, is also, I mean, I know you've used radical humility as an important concept, and I think it's something we try to cultivate. This authentic belief that no, we do not know, and we cannot know, but we can stand beside, and in good cases we can hold a space for people who are struggling, and that's, I think, the basis of open dialogue. There's principles, and there's elements, and there's books, but I think what Jaakko likes to emphasize is it truly is quite simple. In a lot of ways, it's simply being together with another human being as a fellow human being, so that they do not feel alone or isolated. And when we're able to do that, very often people are able to find their own path, their own way to recovery. So I think that's fundamental to what we're doing.
Mark, when you say we're all peers, I mean, certainly there's ways that's true, and I think we're all aspiring toward the day when we can really truly say that. But meanwhile, when we talk about peer-supported open dialogue, what is it that makes a peer in that context?
You want to say something about that, Charmaine?
I guess I can. I guess I was just thinking about, for me, even the work that I've done with peer workers, I think when we're working in an open dialogue way, there's, in terms of practice and what we do, it's very, very different. Open dialogue is a treatment model. So there is, to a degree, some element of clinical practice involved in that, which peer support, it isn't, and even, for peer workers having to unlearn, some of the things that perhaps, not even unlearn, but I guess when they're in a network meeting, to be able to, like we would say to any of our clinical colleagues, just kind of hold what you know in the back of your pockets, or keep it in the back of your mind, and just go in sort of real presence, and, not perhaps needing to disclose any parts of who you are, not even sharing that you may have a connection based on a sickness model. It's about all being human within a room, from my perspective, and nobody going in there and having much more of a, I connect on this level because I have a diagnosis of. Personally speaking, if that comes up in the room, it's very important to be able to have somebody that can be able to say, and I'll give an example of this, but we had a father asking about medication to one of to the doctors, and he was saying, why isn't my son taking this? Why is this happening? Why is that happening? And when we kind of reflected, I had said something to my colleague about a particular curiosity I had about the medication the dad was speaking about. And when we turned back to the network, it was the first time we'd heard the son And he had said, how did you know that about that medication? And he was very curious, and it turned out that the medication that he was on had been a medication that I had taken, and it very much brought a very reciprocal discussion, but not necessarily in that network meeting. There was a connection that was built there, but it's about not really holding any kind of I guess bias, really. And I think that's very difficult as a peer worker, being in a room when you highly connect to someone's struggle, be it a discriminatory struggle or a struggle within the system. It's very difficult to put yourself in that room as an open dialogue practitioner and be very present in that and not bringing your own stuff in. So I think one of the distinctions I would say is very much about, we have to be alongside, and unless something comes up where perhaps it's very useful for us to share our peerness or our life experience or a disclosure to people, it's not often there. Sometimes it can take a long time before somebody knows that I, have been a survivor of using healthcare services before, or been on medication before. And I guess that's not about me, just me. Some of the people that I supervise, some of the peer workers, they say they very rarely, in that network meeting, are the first person to do that sharing about their own experiences. So I guess we are all as one, and we're all just trying to be alongside a family or a social network and a person, that is struggling to kind of find some meaning, really.
Thank you. We haven't heard from Val yet, so I want to invite you to join.
Yeah, I mean, lots of thoughts going through my head. I suppose takes me back to what really made a difference was listening to family members' stories and how powerful that was for me. And now I feel that they are equal peers as well amongst us. And we do have some on our training, but I feel we need a lot more. I think the family members still struggle in many situations to have their voice heard. And it all going back a bit to the beginning, when Russell first approached me, it was one of the reasons that we made it a 1-year training rather than a 3-year training, because knowing that, if we offer a 3-year training, it's never going to happen in the NHS. And it makes it much more difficult for peers, family members, people with lived experience, feel part of it. Even now, a 1-year training is far too expensive for a lot of people. So that's really important, I think, because for me, it's about creating something that happens in the community. I'm trying different ways to get communities involved that currently are on the fringe, and so that, I think, as Charmaine said, it becomes and Mark said about a community approach, people supporting each other. And I would love it if our services weren't needed, and that they were actually designed and by people who have the most experience of them, the people who end up in services, they would have a lot more sort of power and say over how it's designed. How can we respond? Yeah, and that's really important to me at the moment. But as I'm thinking about what it's brought for my life is just some amazing relationships, amazing connections. I just feel so grateful, really, for having had this opportunity and to feel so passionate about what I do, even as I get considerably older. It's just a wonderful feeling, really. Not only with the trainers, and you know, we have a special relationship. We don't always agree, and that's really important too. But every trainee and every family member becomes someone who's really important, I think, in my life as well.
Something that's coming to my mind, I'm aware that as open dialogue was being developed in Tornado, and they began to shift their attention from diagnosis or from heat treating or treating an individual to creating a safe space for social networks to have dialogue. They found, as I understand to their surprise, that the kinds of crises that previously would result in a diagnosis in a chronic situation would resolve instead. And as we're getting questions, and a lot of the questions that are coming into the Q&A box have to do with how can people access training? How can they get this work? How can they get this? And so I guess what I'd like to ask the four of you to ponder is, what have you learned that people can take from this experience into their lives and start to implement, starting now, pending being able to get further and deeper training? Like the one thing I was going to say about Tornio, about Western Lapland, is that they, as I understand it, school counselors there learned that if they were to place a call to psychiatric services for a crisis situation, what would happen would be a gathering of the network and a conversation. And so they began to do that first, gather the network and have a conversation, and found that they could often avoid, going into, further, deeper treatment. And so in that spirit, I'm wondering, how can people learn to do that?
I guess maybe one thing, to sort of say is that we, the difference in Tornio is that it's been there a long time and they've managed to spread it across the culture, right? So open dialogue isn't just something that the health service does, but it's something the community comes together around. And so there's buy-in across lots of different arms of society. We're not, at that stage by any means, in the UK. Our endeavor is to start somewhere, right? I mean, this often comes up with open dialogue, that how can you have a dialogical system in a very hierarchical society, right? So A, we have a hierarchical society. B, we have a hierarchical health service, right? Our health service is very top down. It's a government service, which is good in many ways, but on the other hand, is also very hierarchical. The minister and the government department kind of control the whole system. And so, it then raises the question, how do we do that? And I guess the answer is always, you have to start somewhere, right? So we start somewhere in the system where people are in crisis, and that's the support they get within the community service. We're trialing it in some small areas in order to demonstrate that it's better, produces better outcomes. But, we have a long way to go before it becomes a societally accepted culture change. And I would hope that we will get there. I'll hope that we produce the kind of evidence that will excite people to spread it out. I know there's lots of people in the chat, for example, talking about, what about my area? What about my area? We run conferences, as I think you've joined us in before, right? Where we have hundreds of people from across the country join us in London every year, and we had to pause during the pandemic. And then people are very excited about this. They want this in their area. I'm always getting inquiries from across the country, and unfortunately, because of the way our health service works, we have to prove it first. We've got to prove it in a few small pockets to demonstrate the outcome. That's what the ODDESSI trial is. And then once we do that, then I'm hoping we can make a national argument, a national change, right, to implement it in all sorts of ways. And we've got a very receptive ear from policymakers. And then once we do that, maybe then we can affect the culture beyond that, right? We can go to general practice. We're also doing little sort of pilots in physical health care, in primary care, in different parts of our system, maybe changing the culture. There's people in children's services very interested, older adult services. So we're at early stages, and we're nowhere near the system that they have in Tornio, where it's really part of the whole culture. I hope we can get there. And I think that we need it as a species, just beyond mental health system. I think, I often get onto the soapbox, but I really think that in order for our species to survive, we need to find new ways of talking to ourselves or governing ourselves. And the old system where a few people make decisions for everybody else is not really sustainable. So learning to collaborate is what I think we need. And I think we're stuck as a species because we're trying to birth that new system, but don't really know what it is yet. And so, yeah, I think this transformation is something that's needed on many levels. We're just inserting it at one level, trying to make it survive. In other countries, they've tried, and that's sort of managed to disappear and evaporate within a short space of time. So we're trying to keep it going. I hope that you get to a stage when it reaches a certain critical momentum, that it then spreads out through the culture. But that's the kind of thing we need to get to, which is, it's not a tiny country, so it does need quite a bit of momentum behind it to get there. And only then will we have the more widespread buy-in and engagement of society as a whole, which is, what we're ultimately aiming for. Yeah, we'll keep pushing, I guess.
Can I just add that if you're in services now, or you feel that you're going to become part of one, there are many policies in the UK that say, involving families and their networks is important. And I would just suggest to people, they go armed with these policies and just say, I want my family there, or I want my, teacher there, or whoever. And they, just keep pushing it, because the evidence actually says you need to involve others. The triangle of care, it came up many years ago, says, families and friends should be involved. So, if you feel that you're not getting the service you'd like, you have to be a bit bolshy, but I would just insist that you are listened to. And because the peer movement, I'm very pleased to say, is quite strong as well in this country, in the UK.
Well, we have good evidence of that on the panel. Charmaine, do you have anything to add?
I know Mark was going to say something, so I guess I will be brief. I guess I feel like I've started to do that. I mean, people that are peer dialogue facilitators are people that have, been treated by, having an open dialogue approach. They've wanted to give back something, perhaps not work in the system, and then have moved on to go and work in the system. I'm very much all for bringing in peers to do this work, but I think that there is a huge disparity when it comes to pay and when it comes to qualifying to work in a dialogical way. If what people are doing predominantly is working as an open dialogue practitioner and doing parts of peer work, I think that needs to be reflected much more within the salary. So I think there's a lot more work we've got to do. I think it's a lot more straightforward in the third sector. I think it's easier to kind of carve out exactly what somebody does when they work in an open dialogue way. But because, as I said, when you're working as part of a multidisciplinary team and you're working in working as an part of an open dialogue treatment team, it's a lot more tougher to do that. I also agree that it's difficult to kind of say at what stage do we need, at how much of a peer do you need to be a peer? I think because you may be someone that has direct life experience of using a system, even in what we call acute care, which is kind of using one of our wards or something like that. Of course, that is really important. But I've also, received responses from peer workers that work in open dialogue teams where they've been put in wards when they've been unwell, where they're met by their own patients that they're working with. So I think there's a hell of a lot of work that needs to be done in terms of being able to sustain peer work for not only peer workers that work in open dialogue teams, but peer workers across the NHS. Kermit, Mark, did you have anything you wanted to say?
Not to that issue, I guess. I just noticing in the chat box that a lot of people are asking about open dialogue. So perhaps some of our moderators can set some links, maybe to Val's webpage, to the training, that kind of thing. But also with regards to Russell, he was talking about the need for culture change in the NHS, and part of our history is, of course, I mean, we are standing on the shoulders of psychologist and family therapist Jaakko Saippula, who has helped disseminate ideas about open dialogue for many years, and part of his story is that the first fundamental change that happened was when the consultant psychiatrist came back and said, from Monday, nothing about them without them. We will be completely transparent. All conversations about the person we are trying to support will happen with them present, and preferably, if they would like it that way, with their social network. And he says it made a fundamental seismic change in the culture of the way they worked. Speaking with people instead of speaking about people or speaking to people, which I think we too often do, both in Norway and the United States and England, I think is a fundamental change. And so those are the small things I think that anyone can do. How can we be more transparent? How can we show people the respect they deserve by not speaking about them, but by sharing our own thoughts? And again, there's this sense of humility, there's a sense of tentativeness that we can't know. We may have known the person for an hour or 3 hours, and we have no idea the complexity of their life history. And so we work a lot with unlearning, and how do we invite the social network, and how do we create a dialogical space where people feel safe enough to share their pain, and often shame and guilt and sorrow that affects all of us as human beings. And so a lot of what we try and do is develop those capacities to create that safe space. But as Russell knows, we also need a system that supports that. And one of the most important things is having continuity of care. Instead of having multiple short-term specialized teams where people get sent between teams, one of the basic principles of open dialogue is continuity of care. So that means that there is time to build up authentic, human, trustful, respectful relationships over time. And my thinking is that if that's not there, then you can't do open dialogue. So there is a need for political activism, for changing the system, for creating a system where continuity of care is possible, not only over 6 months, but over a year and 3 years and 5 years. And if a person experiences a new crisis, we do what we can so that they can come back to that same team, to people that they know, and they also know that those people care about them, because it becomes a relational perspective, which Russell has talked about. And it just, Russell won't say it, but if you're interested in open dialogue, read Relational Psychiatry, a book by Russell. Gives a really good explanation of peer-supported open dialogue.
Thank you. I'd like to invite questions from the chat room. Mark, were there any questions in particular that you noticed?
Oh, just some people that were not familiar with open dialogue or peer-supported open dialogue, so they were wondering, what does a meeting look like? How do you do it? But again, I haven't had a chance to look through the Q&A questions. But Val, you've been doing this for ages. Can you give like a short, just a description of the process involved? Yeah, just the kind of on the ground practicalities of it.
Okay. So first of all, it's important that the person who contacts you has a choice about who's invited to a meeting, where it takes place. So that right from the very beginning, they feel that they're part of this process rather than professionals making decisions. And the aim of a meeting is to make sure everybody has a voice. There's a basic understanding that I think that any distress we're feeling. Any pain is often linked to something traumatic that's happened in our lives that hasn't found words. And so the meetings are about giving a space and building relationships between everyone in the meeting. So there's it's safe enough to talk about some things that have been hard to talk about. And that's why it's important to have family or friends, because they can often help provide that support and provide some of the words that may be missing. So the aim is to then have meetings as often as the family or the network feel is going to be helpful, particularly in a crisis. It might be every day. But generally speaking, meetings don't have to be that often. They quickly become maybe even monthly or after the first few meetings. And initially, it's really important not to diagnose, not to offer medication, but those ideas might be important. And it's not that we don't rely on, we don't go to use medication or diagnosis, but it's important to have discussions around that and about how helpful they may be. And so we are tolerating uncertainty around the situation. And through that space that you create, this sense of safety that actually allows families to feel they can talk about very painful things. And sometimes it feels like magic, that you're not actually doing anything. You're just making sure we all have a voice, and our voices are important too, that we share things. And we generally share our thoughts and feelings, our responses, in what we call a reflection with our practitioners, co-practitioners. And we do that very tentatively. We offer how we've responded as a human being to what we've heard. And again, we're always aware that any discussion, any decision is made with the network. We don't, as we've already said, don't have these discussions or make decisions outside of that. So that we're not taking control as practitioners. We're working things out together. And feeling their pain, feeling them as human to human, not as professional or practitioner to another person. And we often find that they will decide when they don't need help anymore. But they may come back in a year's time, and you aim very much to try and have the same team of people, at least one member of that team. So we always work in pairs. We aim to work in pairs most of the time, or sometimes more. Very rarely would you see just have one practitioner. And that would be probably because of sickness or holiday. So the more voices helps create an idea that there are different ways of thinking about this. There isn't just one way. And that's often where people get stuck, that they've gone down a particular path that's led to a dead end and there's no way out. So bringing in lots of different voices actually helps think about, oh, maybe there are other ways of thinking about this. And I think I've heard my own voice enough now.
Well, we can't get enough of it, Val. I'd like to very quickly say one of the more remarkable things that I've experienced in family meetings is noticing that it's not necessarily when the person who called the meeting or the person who's the center of concern speaks that changes the course of things, as when it's the quietest person in the room who is invited to finally, feel the safety to speak, whoever that is. I've seen that in situations where it was somebody that didn't seem to be at the center of the problem, but turned out to be, the best one, whatever. I mean, however it happens. But that's been a thing I've found over and over, is that if you can't make it safe for everybody to speak, then there's, it's hard to get forward motion.
One thing, I totally agree, Kermit. One thing I need to say is it's also need adapted. So there may be lots of other things happening as well. So if somebody needs housing, if somebody needs help with employment, that's all part of it. And often they're more important perhaps than actually creating the space for dialogue. So the meetings are just the small part really of what goes on in someone's life. It's need adapted, and often there are no words. If you're lucky enough to be able to use art or drama, that's really important too. To find different ways of expressing yourself. But I remember Jaakko saying the occupational therapist.
If I may, I'm sorry. While we have Russell, we only have you for a few more minutes, right? Russell? There we go.
My sound cut off then for a second, so I don't know. Did you ask me something?
Oh, I was asking, we only have you for a few more minutes, is that right?
Yeah, I've got to go in a few minutes.
I noticed the question in the chat room, and I apologize again, Val, for cutting you off. But there was a question in the chat room for more information about ODDESSI, and I thought it would be great to hear from you.
Okay.
What's happening with that and what the future is.
Sure, yeah. So ODDESSI it's a multi-center trial, so it's going on across 6 different parts of the UK. So quite a few parts of London. So we've got Camden and Islington, which is very inner London. We've got Waltham Forest, which is also inner London. Havering, which is outer London, where I work. We've got Kent, which is sort of further out, a bit more rural, and we've got Devon, which is more rural still, although that they might be debatable. So we've got about 5 different sites across the country in 6 different organisations, and we've set up small little open dialogue teams in each of these areas. It's a cluster randomised trial. The thing that people complain about whenever I brought open dialogue to policymakers in the UK was that there's no randomized trial. So how do we know these improved outcomes wasn't because of the weather or the water? And unfortunately, it's how academics think. So we've got to try and prove that fundamentally this works regardless of any other confounding variables. So we had to set it up in a few places across the country, and it's cluster randomized, meaning that we picked certain geographies. We delineated certain geographies within each of these areas. So in my area, for example, Havering, we picked 4 clusters of streets really, of where GP surgeries are, and then randomly selected 2 of them to go to open dialogue and 2 of them to have treatment as usual. So if you're in crisis and you happen to be in one of the open dialogue designated clusters, then you'll come into the open dialogue service, otherwise you'll be in the control group. So that's how the mechanics of the trial works. It launched in 2017, and we did a couple of pilots. So my own team and the Kent team, we were the first ones to implement open dialogue. We had to demonstrate that open dialogue is deliverable in the NHS, the answer to which is yes. The services were operating, we were able to have people coming into the service, we were able to measure things about them and evaluate the services, but demonstrating therefore that it's a viable system within the UK. So once we got that, then we got the rest of the money for the wider evaluation, and that's now ongoing. And the things where we started to recruit people from about 2018, we then got hit by the pandemic, so we had to stop recruiting people because no medical trials were allowed in the UK other than COVID-related trials. But after that first lockdown, we were able to restart. The teams across the country were very enthusiastic to restart because they were really committed and passionate to this. And then we completed our recruitment of 500 subjects end of last year, which is very large for a mental health trial. It's one of the biggest mental health model of care trials in the world right now. So we finished recruiting the 500 subjects. Now we're following them up, half of them in the control arms, half of them in the open dialogue arms over the next 2 years. And we're looking at things like, do you end up bouncing back into the services less? Do you end up becoming independent more? Do you end up having better sort of functions? Do you end and a sort of better life afterwards? Do you end up having less care in the long run, less need for care? Do you end up having a better, stronger social network? Maybe we're also looking at mediating factors that might mediate that change. And we're also measuring things like decision making. Is there a better sense of shared decision making in open dialogue compared to the control group? And maybe that's why the outcomes are better, right? So we're looking at a range of different things. We have a whole academic team led by UCL, King's College at London, as well as Birmingham, Middlesex University and others. It's a very large project, lots of funding, lots of academics behind it. And yeah, it's been a thrilling exercise. We're now in the follow-up period. The one thing that we can reveal, the chief investigator of the trial, Steve Pilling, and I have agreed that we can say that there's one thing that we will find unequivocally, and that is that retention of staff in the teams is a lot higher. So the staff turnover, the number of staff who actually leave a service is a lot less in the open dialogue teams. They're staying with their service a lot more in open dialogue than 000. It's so big, that difference is so obvious that we can say so even before we start counting the data, which is about a year and a half away. So in my own service, for example, the turnover rate is something like 3 times higher in the control group than in the open dialogue groups. In the open dialogue group, the function is a lot higher. We have the same people, for a few people in a small team who needed to leave to get promoted. We have largely the same people. But it's doing something for the staff. The staff are passionate about this way of working. We didn't select them on purpose because, as you've seen, it's a cluster randomized trial. So we had to pick people from particular areas of service to join the service. Some of these people are not interested at all. They didn't know what the hell we were talking about. They came into the training and they became so passionate. They're now in those services and they're not leaving. So we already have an outcome, which is extremely unusual for a trial like this, right? You need to wait till you capture all the data, but we can always already say it creates a strong sense of affinity and more retention of staff within services, which is a massive thing in the NHS because we can't retain staff. People leave all the time. So yeah, and then the rest of the outcomes will be counting up sort of towards the end of next year and publish a paper shortly after that in early 2024. And then we aim to take it to policymakers and say, look, guys, this is what we found. What are we going to do about our system now we know this? I went to Steve Pilling, who's the chief investigator of the trial, because he's one of the main government advisors on policy. I went to him to say that one day I'm going to come back with some major evidence that should impact policy. And halfway through the conversation, he said, this is exactly what we should be doing. Would you allow me to help you lead this trial? Of course, you're ideal. So we've got the right people on board listening to us and helping us in the process. And I hope that eventually we'll be able to, make a big difference with the outcomes that we get. If we get just one thing, final thing, if we have a fraction of the outcomes they had in Tornio, if we make a fraction of the difference they did, it would be a game changer in the way we deliver our services. So yeah, we have a lot of hope.
Well, I want to thank you, Russell, for your time today, and more importantly, for everything that you've done and are doing, and I'm so grateful for it.
Thanks very much. It's lovely to join you all. It's always lovely to spend time with you, Kermit and Louisa.
Do you have 2 more minutes, Russell, or do you have to leave?
Yeah, I've got to go, I'm afraid. Was there something you wanted to?
No, I just thought another one of the things you talked about, staff retainment. So I was just thinking about intervision, which is also an innovation that is seeming to be really important for staff as part of their both personal and professional development. And you've been
I can quickly say something. I mean, this is true, and we mentioned the innovations that we brought into open dialogue with peer work, with mindfulness, but actually there's the additional innovation which Mark mentions, which is intervision. It's crucial how the team runs itself. The team has to run itself with similar principles to the way we run these network meetings, because to have a reflective space is just as important for staff as it is for the users of the service. And so there's a meeting system that we've kind of evolved. We stole the word intervision from the Dutch because it kind of doesn't have the idea of supervision. It's not sort of hierarchical. And we create a space where people involved in a network can sit and reflect together, and the rest of the team can then hear their reflection, then reflect on their reflection. So you get a sense of people being able to connect to each other through hearing each other's voices and reflecting to that. And of course, in mental health services, we experience a great deal of distress, right? And in open dialogue, we're opening ourselves up to that on purpose. And so we have to have a space where staff can share that. And our team meetings are therefore conducted very differently. It's not about making decisions in the absence of other people, but it's about sharing where we are, our team members really coming alongside us in the same way we would do with the users of our service, in the network meetings. We try to replicate that. And I think that's part of what creates this affinity. And personal development, self-work is a major part of the training, and we want to continue it on. So in the intervision space, we also say once a month, we want you to pair up and do some personal work with each other, perhaps family of origin work, genogram work. Our colleagues like Kathy and others have massive lists of things that people can do, and we encourage that every month. Keeps the team together, keeps them connected to what's important, and keeps them developing and growing all the time. And I think that's part of the reason why we see this retention so much more.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, everybody. See you soon. Bye.
Thank you, Russell.
Bye, Russ. Val, I wish I had thought to ask you to remember what you were saying when I interrupted you. Do you happen to remember?
Oh, I was just saying that Yako once said to me, you know, the key people in our teams are people who help with employment. So employment support workers and occupational therapists. He said, you know, they really make a difference to people's lives, you know, supporting people back into, and the evidence from Finland is that people don't lose their jobs so often, you know, it's they actually are able to keep their jobs and just perhaps need help for short periods every so often.
Can I just add something there, Kermit? Some people have asked about the composition of network meetings, and I like to think of open dialogue as radically person-driven. It's not person-centered. It's the person that is allowed to make their own choices. And so they're allowed to choose who I bring to where, when, what we talk about. We don't come in with an agenda. And so as Val was saying, it may not be family that comes to the first meeting. Maybe I need employment, so I have someone with employment supporting services, or housing, so I have someone from housing support, or whatever it is you want to have help with. It's your life. We will help you with that. And so that idea that we make that radical transition from mental health care services based on the professionals' preferences and political preferences and organizational and economic preferences, to say, what would a system look like if we really and truly prioritize the person in crisis? And I think what you get is open dialogue. It is, as Val likes to mention, it is open dialogue is based on another Finnish model called the need adapted approach. And so it's continually saying, it's not my life, it's not my agenda. How can I help? Whatever is important for you, we will be there. Who can help us with this? Well, let's bring them into the next meeting and talk about what you want to talk about. And that's the simplicity of open dialogue. It's just simply bringing those people together. And as some people may be aware, it's based on the idea of social network therapy that was developed by Carolyn Atneve and Ross Speck in the late 1960s. So there's a long tradition of involving social networks to create a stronger connection of relationships to support the person in crisis.
Thank you. Yeah, I noticed that Jonathan Dosick asked whether it's the who sets the schedule of the meetings, and so I thought perhaps Charmaine could speak well to that, which would further on what Mark was just talking about.
Yeah, I guess, well, the network meetings I'm always involved in, we're always curious to know what has brought everybody to that meeting, as well as just one particular person to that meeting. So I guess we would, depending upon, how many people are there, we would set the space to hear everybody's voice, what has brought us all to the meeting, even us as practitioners, really. What brings us to the meeting, what might we want to bring to that space, which I guess is a bit, what we often hear from a lot of people that may be called the person at the center of concern. And I guess a lot of people, even that name to some people is like, what does that mean? Am I the only person in this space that is at the center of concern? I think that is also, as we're evolving, something that should also be spoken about. And many of our so-called people at the center of concern have often, been in network meetings where I guess other people have needed that space just as much as they have really needed it. So it's a space for every voice to be heard, literally every voice to be heard, from my own experience, Kermit.
Well, one thing I've noticed is that one of the open dialogue procedures is to, at the end of the meeting, say, when should we meet next? And one thing I've noticed is that's a critical moment, because it's empowering of the network, and it helps. It's a moment of reflection of what do we need. You know, it establishes what I call the crisis horizon. Is how far into the future can we see getting without a little bit of help, and that often serves to help to reduce the sense of crisis, just going through that process, and also knowing that the team is going to be there for them, whatever that might be. So that's been my experience. So, sorry, does that resonate?
I mean, we have to be realistic as well. I mean, often we have busy diaries, so it's not just an open, oh, well, I want to meet tomorrow or the next day. You still have to negotiate quite often, but it is a negotiation, a collaboration. Yeah.
Before I go looking for more questions, is what's bubbling up for you three?
What's bubbling?
I guess some of the questions and some of the things we've just talked about, I just want to emphasize, there was a comment earlier in the chat, like what happens if there's difficult relationships within the family, and some persons in the family want something else for the person at the center of concern than they want for themselves. And that happens, but it still remains where we're still building relationships. If one person is suffering, very often multiple people are suffering, and they may not agree. And so what we try and do is also create a safe space for those conflicting ideas and actually be able to talk about it. If that doesn't seem to work, open dialogue isn't family therapy. It's not like we're intentionally trying to treat the family. We're asking the person who can help you with what you need help with now. If that's not mom and dad at the moment, that's completely fine. Do you have a colleague? Do you have a neighbor? Do you have a friend? What about Aunt Mary or Uncle George? What about grandma? Is there anyone in your social network that you would like to come and participate in the meetings because you think they could support you with whatever issues you're struggling with now? And so that's really, every single meeting is essentially a creative space, thinking about how we can optimize helping that person with whatever they want help with. And I just think it's important to say that as it works out, open dialogue is a wonderful fundament for just about everybody.
Yeah, I guess thinking about what's bubbling inside of me is just thinking about this idea of you know, how we come into this work and not putting everybody in a box, you know, because not everybody with, you know, a label, whether that be a survivor, whether that be someone who's still in services, whether that be someone that's never, you know, been in services before, does consider themselves as a peer. But those voices are hugely important within a network and a network meeting space. I think the ethos and the values and the origins and the underpinnings of what peer support tries to teach fundamentally the world is what's imperative in what we are trying to do by you know, implementing it in open dialogue. I guess we're not trying to put people in boxes and say, you know, hey, because you're queer and you're Black and you have life experience, we're going to call you a peer. For me, I just see people as people, and before they were given labels, they have an experience, they have a story to share alongside everybody else that, you know, is in that network meeting that may be vital for somebody's recovery journey and experience. And I wouldn't want us to be, I guess, forgetting about people that don't see themselves as peers. I mean, Ray is a fantastic ambassador as someone who has life experience, and she says quite openly she doesn't see herself as a peer. I guess I'm just thinking about the voices of everybody that perhaps may, be on the kind of survivor movement that wants a voice, that don't consider themselves a peer worker. How could you be involved in peer supported open dialogue? Please don't segregate yourself. Please don't feel that you have to have done a peer certificated training or curriculum to be involved. That's not the ethos. The ethos is we take the origins of what peer support is about, and we try to all live by it and practice it within our work, really.
Thank you. I noticed a question a while back about whether and how to include police in the open dialogue process. And what that brings to my mind is the question of how do you manage risk in this situation or in this work?
Oh, that's quite an easy one, really. You involve the network. You have an open discussion. If you're worried, you're concerned about someone, you share that, and you get everyone in the meeting to share. Are they worried? And together you come up with something which is far stronger, far better at managing any risk there might be than going through a tick box. And you get the network on side and involved in it. So our obsession with reducing risk leads to an increase in risk. But yeah, you just make it a dialogical process, and yeah.
Other thoughts?
No, but I guess thank you for asking, and whoever in the chat, thank you for asking that, because it is something that's, we can't do open dialogue because of the risk. And yet the research related to that actually shows that risk assessment within an open dialogue meeting, where there's a sense of space, of honesty, a willingness to be honest, where the social network who has known the person and followed the person probably for their entire life knows what may have happened and not happened and how they react, and also how they can support them. So before you leave the meeting, you say, should we create a crisis plan, and let's do that collaboratively and make sure everyone's safe and who can do what when. So it actually works out. It's an excellent way of minimizing risk, and just for that reason, it should be implemented in addition to everything else.
Yeah, I guess one of the things I would also say is about the shared decision making that takes place, and true shared decision making. Really wanting to hear the voice of the person at the center, and what that experience of that section may be for them, even if they're not able to perhaps articulate that. I think there's ways in which people can express what's happening for them without words. And also just to remember that actually working dialogically, that shared decision making also takes place, at least in the UK where I work, on the ward as well. So that continuity of care stays with that person. Our meetings still happen. We will come on the ward and support you. We will connect with your treatment team on that ward. And I guess for me and some of the colleagues I've worked with, we kind of say we felt like we're with that person. Yes, of course, we get to go home. We get to kind of shut off and shut down, and that person doesn't. But the experience of that person going onto that ward is felt by all of us collectively, and not just that person. And I think that's dramatically different, actually.
I'd like to just add, in some of the situations I've been in, I have invited police into the dialogue and found that they were thrilled at the opportunity, that they generally experience themselves as, having to deal with a problem as an end result past the point that they would have liked. And I've been surprised at just how eager police have been to come and get familiar with the situation that they know might potentially have become difficult. And there was another question I noticed. Somebody asked, have you ever had to ask somebody to leave a meeting?
I don't know if I've ever asked someone to leave a meeting. I think we might have had a discussion about, is this okay right now? And check out with everybody, and maybe we decide to either meet again or in a couple of days, or we might actually say, would it be better if, say, the brother met alone with someone? You know, it's okay to decide that some people aren't ready for those, you know, to meet with other family members or friends, and that you offer them a separate space, and then you have to agree about what's shared. You know, if you go back to the, bring it back to the meeting. So it's, yeah, I don't think I've ever actually said, please leave, but.
I think it's a fundamental aspect of open dialogue that it's not our meeting. So if there's an immediate threat of physical violence, that's a very unique happening that requires potentially kind of going out of an open dialogue context. But in most cases, before that happens, if you're sensitive enough, you say, right now, I'm feeling a little bit unsafe, or I wonder how someone else is feeling, and you might share that in a reflection with your colleague, so the network can sit and reflect over that and then answer. But again, it's their meeting, so you would, as much as possible, if you're sitting with your worries and your concerns, and you think maybe something is becoming unsafe, then in open dialogue, you try to share that as gently, but also as honestly as possible, and compassionately, because there's reasons for people being angry and upset, and people sitting with a lot of trauma. So we try to understand that and discuss it, and usually that makes a huge contribution to that resolving itself. And I think Cindy or someone else wrote in the chat, do we need a break? Should we go get some fresh air? The adrenaline's pumping. We know that's just a physiological process. So how should we manage? Maybe we need a break, and we'll come back in 10 minutes. So there's all kinds of creative solutions to those things. But again, it's that fundamental change of, it's not our meeting. It's not we who make the decisions, but create a space for discussing alternatives and hoping to come to a solution that is beneficial, not only for the person at the center of care, but also for the rest of the network, if that's possible.
If I may ask, for anybody, have you been in situations where you were watching that you felt were abusive, and how do you respond to that?
Yeah, I have. Yeah, Charmaine's nodding.
Probably very similar to everyone. I mean, it's not only what we see, I think it's what we feel. I go by my body as well. And I guess if there is something I can't accept that is happening for me, being in that space, I have a trauma history too. I have to be aware of my own limitations in that space. I may ask to reflect how I'm feeling to my colleague, to see if this is just is this something that's happening for me? Is this something that's happening for other people in the room? Just to kind of really name what I'm experiencing, and owning what I'm naming. That's what I've tended to do, and give other people a voice to kind of name what they experience too. More often than not, I guess some, families or friends may be used to, having perhaps quite passionate or very fruitful ways of kind of communicating that perhaps might feel quite difficult for me, or might feel quite coercive or controlling for me, and for other people that may be okay. But I think in terms of levels of boundaries, I think we teach people how we want to be treated, and I think if we don't educate or at least reflect from what we see ourselves as practitioners, how do we expect people's circumstances to change, or for people to change, or to name what, you know, how they feel as a result of other people's behavior? So I would try to name it and see if we could bring it out in the space personally.
It doesn't happen a lot, really. I think because people feel you're holding their emotions. You know, I often hear, look, we can't have these conversations at home because we just break out in arguments or violence. But here with you, it feels okay. So you're actually creating a safe space. But certainly as a family therapy trainee, I had a situation where a stepfather was really being quite abusive to his stepdaughter. And my supervisor didn't really handle it very well, and we lost that family, and they never came back because she felt she needed to step in and say, this abuse has to stop. And he walked out. But yeah, I mean, it doesn't happen as often as you think, I think.
I've found that one of the challenges in adapting open dialogue that, you know, the open dialogue's been very successful in Western Lapland. Russell mentioned the statistics, the outcomes are very strong. And I think that one of the things that's perhaps sometimes not noticed about that is the fact that because it is a part of the system, it is the government. It is, you know, the practitioners, although they're not wearing uniforms, have the authority along with the responsibility that it takes to handle a situation, to help a situation be safe where necessary. Have you run up against limits on your ability to do the same thing?
I was trying to respond to someone there, Kermit. Would you mind repeating? Was it about limits to what we can offer?
Yeah, I guess I'm inviting the experience of, you know, trying to replicate or trying to fulfill the inspiration of open dialogue outside of the context where the practitioners have all the responsibility that they need to fulfill have all the authority that they need, if necessary, to call in the support, call in the help, call in, you know, arrange things. Has that been difficult for you to not have that?
Not have the ability to call in others. Do you want to say something, Mark?
Yeah, I'm just saying that Western Lapland was very similar to the small rural community I first initially worked with in South Central Norway. And there was a completely different dynamic when it was a small local community, when you actually knew the policeman and you knew the child welfare worker and you knew the teachers at the school because your children went to that school. And that's essentially what Tornio was in Kerapudas. It was a very tightly knit local community. I think they achieved what they did because they were allowed to grow and develop and see the potentialities of a local community. I think it's, and again, in a Nordic perspective, I work mostly in Norway, there is a lot more investment in primary community-based care than there is in the NHS. It's kind of an oxymoron that open dialogue is in statutory secondary services with specialist services. It should be, and I think this is what they're trying to do in the NHS with the community mental health transformation, is it should be place-based. It should integrate into a local community. You should know You should know your community well and which resources are available. And in Tornio and in Valdres, Norway, where I was working, people knew their local communities. They knew which resources were there. They knew who they could ask. They had a personal relationship to the different professionals within that community. And I think if that's developed in a good way, it offers a huge potential. So we're not necessarily expecting to get the same results as Tornio, but as Russell said, if we get a fraction of those results within the NHS, then we can fundamentally change a lot of what actually happens in the NHS, and thereby actually create much better services for tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people who go in crisis every single year.
We lost Charmaine for a few moments. I'd like to invite you to put in your last thoughts before we go to the...
Sorry, I didn't happen to hear the question. I lost the sound on my... Bye, Val.
Bye, Val.
Bye, Val.
Bye.
Thank you
everybody.
so much.
Thank you for this.
Thank you.
Yeah. I also want to acknowledge Kathy Thorley is in the chat room. I forgot, or I didn't, I noticed that she's in there. She's one of the trainers that I got to know in the UK, and so happy to see her here participating in the chat. We were talking about basically the question of how has it been for you to attempt to follow in the inspiration of open dialogue and fulfill the expectations that we get from the research that comes out of this, the very strong outcomes research, given that you don't have all of the same resources or authorities or you know, that they had.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for asking. At times, very frustrating, highly exciting. Lots of long nights and very short days. I guess, you know, I, like many of the other trainers on the team, are very passionate about this work, and I think we try to spread it as many places as we can because we want it to be sustainable. You know, so for example, I guess I feel quite privileged to be able to work within the NHS, but also within the third sector. That kind of gives me, I guess, more opportunities to kind of take the skills I've learned and share them sort of far and wide to people. So yeah, I kind of feel like it's a duty and a calling, really. I feel like this isn't the kind of work that we can switch on and off from. So a blessing and a curse, but much more a blessing, I would say, and always feeling like a lot to aspire to. But we were over in Finland just a few weeks ago, and it was so wonderful to hear them say that they still feel that this is the start of their journey too. So it doesn't feel like we're so alone, actually.
Well, the start of a journey, that's a good place to end.